All right guys, so we're now going to have a look at two other seated machine row variations, namely looking at biasing the rear delts, but also biasing the upper back as well in two slightly different arm paths. So you'll notice that right from the get-go here, we haven't even considered using the handles that are on offer by the machine here. The reason why is that we've already had a look at this machine before Charlie set up, and we realized straight away that for him to get the arm path required for him to bias his rear delts, simply this narrow handle down here isn't going to be ideal, and also just this pronated grip up here isn't really great for him either if he wants to keep the elbows around that 30 to 45 degree sort of level of abduction he would need in order to get those rear delts short. So you'll see that Charlie, we've got the handles right from the start. From a setup perspective, his hips are sitting a little bit more forward than they were on the lat focused row, and his chest is going to be in neutral at the start position. Now, as he starts thinking about driving those elbows back and out, the key focus here of the rear delt row is more about getting the upper arm into extension rather than it is necessarily about how wide they go. It's much more rather about getting them in tight to the body. It's more that kind of 30 to 45 degree roughly arm path. It's about getting those elbows as far back behind the body as we can, driving that humeral extension so that we can really get those rear delts as balled up as humanly possible. And you'll see why if you just even look at his wrist position, how that's a much better setup for him. Now, a couple of mistakes that people will often make is using excessive amount of momentum and also just throwing ourselves back away from the chest pad here as well, and almost overextending through here as well, which we don't want. So remember, we want to promote and allow natural scapular movement, so the shoulder blades to move around the rib cage on the eccentric and the scaps to move in towards the middle of the rib cage on the concentric as he pulls back here. The next thing as well is that we do want there to be a little bit of thoracic extension. So as he pulls back, we're starting in a neutral T-spine position, but then just as he gets towards end range, he pulls arms first. He just finishes with that little bit of T-spine extension, and that's just going to allow him to get that last little bit of movement from the scaps and allow him to get those rear delts that little bit shorter as well. Now, if we look at the mid-back row, it's a little bit different. We could stay with the handles here, but in this case, actually, we know for Charlie that for him, holding the handles in that kind of pronated grip actually is ideal for him, because that's going to allow him to focus on almost abducting his arms out and away from the midline of the body. If you go again, Charlie. So you'll see now that this actually lines up incredibly well for him. The arm path being now, instead of around that 30-45 degree range, he's now much more in that kind of 60 to 70 degree range of abduction from there. And so rather than thinking about getting the arm as far back as possible, although that's still a consideration, the goal now is to think about abducting the elbows as wide as he possibly can. And just as he's about to get past somewhere around that middle point, he's then thinking about finishing with those elbows almost coming in and around the rib cage, as if he was going to get his elbows to touch behind his back. And just maximizing that tension through a lot of those guys in here, like the rhomboids, the mid traps, and the teres, and so on and so forth. Now, Charlotte, show a bad movement. So again, it's that excessive leaning momentum. The other things you'll often see here as well, though, is that forcing of the elbows down, so almost like ending up in a bit of a quasi-weird position, which is really not what we're after here. And you'll probably find that if you do that for long enough, you may end up with some discomfort around the elbow joint. What you might also see as well on both of these rowing variations is the upper traps coming in first, whereas actually what we want, and we don't want to restrict the trap movement here, and that's quite important because a lot of people believe that the upper trap should be completely silent throughout this, but actually what we're after here is we just want the start of the movement to come from scapular retraction, T-spine extension, and as he gets towards the end of his row, the upper traps naturally are going to slightly elevate towards the end of retraction. So definitely don't stop those upper traps from working, just be mindful that they're not kicking in far too early. So one more good rep, Charlie. So we focus again on abducting elbows as wide as possible, finishing with that real hard scapular retraction, pulling those shoulder blades in towards each other at the end and contracting all of those tissues across the mid and upper back.